In today's video, I'll refinish and repair this old table. I found this in a thrift store. I paid $10 for it. There's no maker's mark on it, so I don't know who made it, but I could tell just by looking at it that it's a good quality table. The top and the sides are walnut veneer, and the legs and the slats on the bottom are solid wood, and they look like they're probably elm. The worst damage is on the finish on the top. The rest of it also has some nicks and scratches, so I'll be refinishing the entire thing. I began by scraping off the old finish. It was a thin lacquer finish, and it was easy to scrape off, especially on the large flat areas like the top and sides. It was a little trickier down here getting in between the smaller pieces. It would have been a lot easier if I could have taken this apart, but this table had nails in just about every joint. I sometimes work on pieces of furniture that have nails in the joints because the joint was loose and a previous owner tried to repair it by driving a nail in there, which isn't a good way to fix it because most of the time it's still loose even after putting the nail in there, and then the nail makes it very hard to get the joint apart to fix it properly with glue. But in this case, it looks like the nails were probably put in at the factory, just judging by how neatly it was done, how uniform the placement is, and also none of the joints were loose. So I'm assuming these were probably put in at the factory to help hold it all together while the glue dried. Thankfully, none of these joints were loose, so I didn't need to get any of the joints apart to reglue them, which would have been difficult with the nails in there. But it also meant that I couldn't take it apart to get easier access for scraping. So it took a little while getting in these tight areas, but eventually I got it all scraped off. Once I scraped off most of the finish, I removed whatever small bits were left with a sander. There was a small dent on one of the legs, so I wanted to try and steam that out. First, I had to scrape off the little bit of finish that was left in the dent. Once the finish was off, then I could apply a little bit of water. And then I took a wet rag and a hot soldering iron and applied it to the dent. And this usually works pretty well on dents to get the wood fibers to rise up again. It's not going to work nearly as well on a scratch or a gouge where the wood fibers have been torn out. But in a dent, the fibers are still there. They've just been pushed down. And then I just needed to let it dry and sand it smooth again. Then it was time to start applying finish. The legs on this piece are a different kind of wood than the walnut veneer that's on the top and sides, and it's much lighter. Here you can see as I wet the piece down with some water after I remove the finish, the walnut top and sides are much darker than the legs. So I knew that I wanted to bring the color of the legs closer to the color of the walnut. To do this, I used some brown dye stain, and I made the stain myself just by mixing some trans-tint medium brown dye with water. And I applied this just to the legs and the bottom shelf thing, but I didn't apply it to the walnut top or sides. The color on those was good on its own, so I knew I would just be applying a clear finish to the top and sides with no stain. And it's a good idea when you're using a water-based stain like this to wet down the wood with water before you apply the stain, let it dry, and then sand it smooth again, because the water is going to make the grain raise. So by wetting it down before you apply the water-based stain and sanding it smooth, then it will greatly reduce how much the grain is raised when you put on the water-based stain. The top had a few round dark marks on it. I couldn't tell if they were water stains or not, but I decided to try some oxalic acid to see if it would remove the stains. Oxalic acid is really good at removing black water stains. Although I wasn't sure what caused these stains, it couldn't hurt to try the oxalic acid. So I just mixed it up with some warm water and wiped it on and let it dry. And when I came back, the marks were still there. It looked like the oxalic acid didn't really do anything. At that point, my only options to remove these or to hide these would be to sand them out, but actually that wasn't an option because this was veneer, and I would have ended up sanding right through the veneer. And the other option was to try to disguise them a bit with some paint. I've done that before on some of my videos, but in this case, I decided not to do that and just let them be. They didn't stand out too much, and they almost looked like knots in the wood, so I just left them. The drawer had one loose corner on it, but this was a pretty easy fix. I just had to put some new glue in there. And then clamp it up. This knob is solid walnut. To get the finish off of the knob, I just chucked it into my drill, turned on the drill, and used some sandpaper to remove the finish. Once the stain was dry, then I applied a wipe-on satin oil-based polyurethane to the entire piece. And once I got that clear coat on, I could see that the dye stain that I applied worked really well and helped to bring the legs closer to the color of the walnut veneer on the top and sides. This table originally would have been finished at the factory with lacquer, and they most likely used a colored lacquer that was sprayed over the entire piece to give the whole piece a uniform color, since the legs were so much lighter than the walnut top and sides. That way, they wouldn't have to use walnut on the entire thing. They could use a cheaper wood for the solid legs. And here it is, all finished. Thanks for watching.